I'm Greg Guma, and this is the People's Republic. This is one of those cases where justice delayed is justice denied. So warned the judge. It wasn't a case about the president or some other crucial national matter. It was about a local radio station, and the district judge, Paul Engelmeyer, was urging the two sides to make a deal, and also offering some advice before sending the case back to state court. He had just ruled that he didn't have the jurisdiction to hear it. On one side was Arthur Schwartz, a host on New York FM radio WBAI, in this case acting as the station's lawyer. Reaching a settlement wouldn't be easy, he said. The animosity between the two sides is really thick. When I even say the word settle, I get moans and groans. On the other side was the Pacifica Foundation, which owns WBAI's broadcast license, and its new interim CEO, John Vernile. On October the 7th, Vernile shut down the station's studios in Brooklyn and replaced local programs with a feed from Pacifica stations and other sources. Producers, board members, and supporters immediately went to state court and claimed the layoffs were illegal. They won a restraining order. Then half the local board passed a series of motions reversing the network's actions. But Pacifica also went to court, federal court, and there another judge blocked the WBAI group from doing anything for a while. On the surface, the dispute is about who has the power to make decisions about WBAI under Pacifica's bylaws, but the disagreements run much deeper. Pacifica's leadership claims the layoffs were necessary due to the station's poor financial condition. WBAI staff and supporters say the move was an attempted coup meant to silence radical voices. Vernile claimed in a court document, quote, I have never seen a major market station in worse shape. As a result, the network was using its own cash reserves and those of other stations to cover BAI's costs. The other side conceded that the station had been losing money for years. Still, the shutdown interrupted a fund drive, which might have helped, and they insisted that the financial arguments are just a cover story. The real goal, they charged, is to silence politically radical hosts. One piece of evidence involves a station promo in August in which the phrase "Stop Trump" was used during a spot on national immigration policy. In a written warning to station manager Bertolt Reimers on September 27th, Vernile called the promotion an FCC compliance violation. He wrote, quote, advocating for and lobbying for political candidates on WBAI's air endangers WBAI and Pacifica's IRS and New York State charity status and FCC license and will not be tolerated. The layoffs came not long after that. The local faction contends that Pacifica's bylaws don't give the foundation's executive director the power to seize a radio station. Network officials say the layoffs weren't a seizure since Pacifica owns WBAI's equipment, space, and FCC license. On October the 15th, WBAI producers held a rally outside of New York City Hall and called the shutdown a rogue effort to destroy WBAI. Dozens of supporters voiced support for the 60-year-old station. One called it the lifeblood of radical activism in New York. Quite a claim. Both New York City Council Majority Leader Laurie Cumbo and Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, prominent progressives in the cities, attended the protest and backed the local resistance. Adams said, quote, there is a movement to destroy independent communications across this entire country, and this has become ground zero. We're about to fight to keep this station alive. So, now defending WBAI was becoming part of the Trump resistance. We are not going to allow WBAI to fail, added Cumbo, end quote. He called the shutdown an act of gentrification. And he said, "This voice, this access to information is so critical for each and every one of us. And if we want to talk about a progressive New York City, we cannot be progressive if ideas that are progressive have no place to live, to flourish, or to be disseminated." It's quite a story already. But there is more to it than a simple struggle between noble locals and an overreaching national leadership. You see, Pacifica Radio has been at war with itself for decades. In this episode, Pacifica Radio, Progressive Media's Fragile Democracy, Part 1, Managing Chaos.
In December of 1970, more than 170 people from all walks of life came together to read one of the great novels of all time.
Here is Alexandra Tolstoy reading the first page of her father's novel from the original text.
Eh bien, mon prince, Jeanne et Luc ne sont plus que des apanages.
My name is Dustin Hoffman, and I'm reading Book 1, Part 1.
This is Buck Henry, reading chapters 20 and 20.
This is Richard Avedon, reading pages 141.
This is Joseph Heller, reading pages 100.
This is Elsa Knight Thompson.
My name is Barbara Oka.
This is Grandma Dottie.
This is Fay Ray.
This is Anne Donegan, translator of War and Peace.
This is Blue Gabriel, reading part 3.
This is Thomas Stewart.
My name is Robert Moss.
This is Freddie Dundee.
This is Diane Serber.
I'm Alison Steele of WNEW-FM, and I'm delighted to be here at WBAI.
My name is Sheldon Harnick. I'm a lyricist for the theater.
My name is Marvin Kittman.
Mitch Miller, number 33. Book 1, Part 3, chapters 13 and 14, pages...
This is Theodore Bickel. I shall be reading...
This is William F. Buckley, Jr., reading pages 923.
This is Mel Brooks.
This is Julius Lester.
This is Margot Adler of WBAI.
This is Pete Seeger, reading pages...
Anne Bancroft, pages 1389...
This is Morris Karnofsky. In the present case, it is similarly necessary to renounce a freedom that does not exist and to recognize a dependence of which we are not conscious.
Nearly 5 days later, the legendary actor Morris Karnofsky read the famous last words to Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, ending what was at the time the longest continuous broadcast in radio history. The station was New York's WBAI, part of the Pacifica Radio Network. The date, December 6, 1970.
By the time I was hired, Pacifica Radio had been through more than a decade of internal struggle. Worried about a possible corporate takeover in the 1990s, the members of the staff and board members, volunteers at the 5 owned stations had fought back in court, in the studios, and on the streets, and eventually created a new, more democratic governance structure. But that didn't prevent factions from forming at various stations or avoid contested board elections and bitter charges that the process was unfair or even rigged. When I became CEO in 2006, the organization was battle-weary but recovering and financially stable. Its next 2 years would be more peaceful than most. We launched new shows and settled some old lawsuits. But the animosity and tribalism didn't go away. After 2 years, rather than becoming the center of yet another internal power struggle, I stepped aside to make way for another chief executive, someone who had been fired years before. But she did not appreciate the new structure and soon left, and one of her successors resorted to barricading herself in the national office rather than accept a replacement. In the last decade, Pacifica stations have lost funding and listeners in an increasingly diverse, digitally driven world. At the start of the Iraq War, being a radio voice of opposition helped its stations to expand audiences and revenues. But President Trump has so many enemies that it's harder to stand out these days. Still, you might expect that the danger of fascism would bring people together. Well, think again. In September 2018, a new CEO was hired after a lengthy search, But within 9 months, Maxie Jackson was forced out. Then board chairman Grace Aaron became CEO, a job some said she hoped to keep. However, a new chief had actually been hired and lined up in secret. Finally, the board was forced to issue an announcement. The new man, Giancarlo Vanille, promised to focus on, quote, activity that engages audiences, expands opportunities for financial support, and stabilizes national operations. But who was Pacifica's new leader? A former Sony Music and EMI executive, basically a salesman and a promoter who had been a premiums vendor for a Pacifica station. Unfortunately, he brought no experience in managing a democratic rather than a corporate enterprise, and it showed. A crisis quickly developed at WBAI, once a great station but long in debt and listener free fall. According to longtime WBAI supporter Steve Brown, one faction of its local board, together with several national board members, wanted to lease the station to a corporate division of Time Warner. The goal, ostensibly, was to stabilize the operation, but Brown claimed the move would actually destroy it. Whether or not that was true, a month later, the Pacifica Board of Directors abruptly laid off most of WBAI's staff and replaced its local programming with shows from Pacifica's 4 other stations and other material. Network spokespeople claimed that the decision to shut down WBAI's operations in Brooklyn, New York, had been in the works for months, calling it an essential step to save the larger foundation from ruin. In an October interview with the New York Times, Bernil added that the station had fallen short of its fundraising goals in recent years and was unable to make payroll and other expenses. This had frequently forced the foundation to bail it out. He said, listeners in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Houston, and Washington, D.C. have been supporting the efforts in New York. It has gotten to a point where we can no longer do that. On the other hand, WBAI supporters, board members, and staff called the move a coup, meant to silence radical voices. The New York Times added WBAI and Pacifica had been under strain for years. Pacifica has not released any financial statements since 2017, when its auditors cited doubts that the organization could continue as an ongoing concern. How could it happen? The original listener-supported network with stations in 5 major cities and more than 100 affiliates at one point, once reaching millions with important alternative voices, including Amy Goodman, now hovering on the edge of insolvency. And what does it say about the prospects for both media and democracy?
These are religion times, really, so much to fight for, so many to fight against.
This is Informed Dissent, Pacifica Radio's national program looking at this year's midterm elections and beyond.
Democrats are still funding this war. They're not willing to stop funding this war. You, as running as a Democrat for Congress...
Well, I'm willing to take a look at that. I mean, we can't just completely cut off funds, but like I said, we have to set a timetable.
In this segment, we look at Iraq War vets running for office. I'm Mitch Jeserich at Pacifica Station WBAI in New York. There are about a half dozen Iraq War veterans who are running for Congress nationwide. Out of all of them, only one is a Republican. And one of the more notable Democratic candidates is Tammy Duckworth in Illinois. Duckworth received major combat injuries in Iraq, resulting in loss of both legs and significant damage to her right arm after a Black Hawk helicopter that she was co-piloting was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. The campaign is one of the most closely watched in the country, as Duckworth and a Republican opponent, Peter Roskam, are vying to replace retiring longtime Republican Representative Henry Hyde.